want people to be in a space where we can have these difficult conversations, not to cause discomfort, but in order to really deepen our sense of humanity, right? Our shared humanity, to be able to get to stronger objectives that help us as a community, as a nation, as a global community. And so I think these things are really important, because if we fail to have these conversations, if we fail to have resolution on some of these issues, we're just going to keep repeating the same mistakes over and over again. And it feels very much like today we are caught in that cycle of can't believe, something that was addressed 50 years ago, 100 years ago, so forth, is back on the table. And it is because we never fully finished the conversation.
Welcome to Unpacked Culture Chronicles. I'm Nichole Bernard of My Virtual Genius and one of the behind-the-scenes team members of Culture Principles. This podcast is dedicated to exploring cultural differences, similarities, and the strategies that help us bridge them. Today, I'm thrilled to be sitting down with Danielle Marshall, the visionary and founder of Culture Principles, which is celebrating its 5th year of building inclusion into the foundation of organizations and individuals, to talk about what she has learned in the last 5 years, what she envisions for the future, and key takeaways for anyone wishing to build a more equitable and inclusive world. All right. So Danielle, I'm so excited to sit down and talk to you a little bit more on your anniversary for Culture Principles. And I'm so excited that we get to talk on your podcast, because I've been listening and I've been loving everything. So I feel a bit of a celebrity today. So thank you for having me, and thank you for inviting me to ask you some questions.
Thank you. And I love this, that we get to sit down and have this conversation as well. And it feels funny for me because the tables are reversed, right? Like you're asking me the questions this time, but I'm looking forward to digging in, see what you have, because I don't know what the questions are going to be.
No. So this is going to be fun, and I really can't wait. My very first question is going to be, what inspired you to step into this work 5 years ago?
Yeah, I appreciate that question just as a starting place. I can't say that I was just inspired 5 years ago. I think that I have been really giving a lot of thought to the work that I do as an equity strategist and executive coach for quite some time, even before I started this. And just to give sort of listeners a little bit of a background, I come out of the nonprofit sector, and what was particularly interesting, over a 20-year career, was just hearing the various narratives that were present in the communities that I served, often youth serving programs, Black and Brown communities, though it was more diverse than that. And the narratives that were shared were generally, they weren't necessarily positive about these communities. And I found it troubling. And so I think my initial walk into the equity space had to do with how I was hearing stories told about these communities, but also realizing, as someone who was on the ground every day, working with the children, working with their families, where there was some level of just a disconnect between the story and the reality. And so my background is as an industrial organizational psychologist. And so what I was really beginning to tie together is this was less about the kids, it was less about the families, and it was absolutely about the systems that they were exposed to. And when we think about the outcomes that people are able to achieve in life, yes, some of it does relate to us as individual people, the level of academics that we are able to lean into, our understanding of the world. But so much of it was about systems that really, quite frankly, were set up to keep people from achieving above a certain level. And so when I started to think about that, and also holding space for the narratives I had been told, pretty much my whole life, and definitely saw within these nonprofit settings, I said, well, what if we start to look at these two things together, right? So like if I can now have an impact on the system itself, there's an opportunity to potentially change the outcomes, and quite frankly, change the narratives that children tell themselves, because we often adopt language and belief systems that come from how we're socialized and what we are constantly told. It becomes a sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so I wanted to lean into this work to really, particularly at the nonprofit level, because that was my background, to begin to understand what was happening that would force certain outcomes to be true or not true in different communities.
Wow. It sounds like you saw a need and fulfilled it. And that is just a beautiful thing to see, especially when you're bridging a gap there. So, my next question, as you look back on 5 years, what has surprised you the most about this journey?
I think what has been really, I don't know if I would say it was a surprise, but it was not something I was anticipating. And I think it is the complexity of people. So I spend a lot of time in the DEI space, and right now that is a hot button topic for so many people that are, maybe anti or very pro DEI. And as I bring up the complexity of people, I think what struck me as most interesting, and quite inspiring actually, is that there are so many layers to us. And so it's never going to be for me just about talking about one identity that we possess. Like, we can certainly have that conversation, but I know listeners who have heard the podcast in the past will hear me say, I don't believe in monoliths. And so if we're not monolithic as any group of individuals, then we have to also look at the other things that make us diverse by nature. So if I happen to be talking to you as a woman today, like, yes, my womanness is something that informs how I see the world, but it is not the only identity marker. Now, if we add in that I am a Black woman, that I am Christian, that I am ... it becomes much more complex. And I'm wanting to be able to hold space for all of the different things that people bring in, because I think that's when we're really looking at people's authenticity. And outside of even social identity markers, what's been interesting to see is how it plays in then to other things that we may not think about with respect to culture all the time, like communication, how we view education, science, like all of the different things. But these absolutely are impacted by how we are showing up within our cultures, but we're also different. And so I'm trying to look for a better way to actually say this, but like, just because I am a member or you are a member of a given identity group does not mean you hold to every value, every norm that particular group has. And so when I look at that, like, we are both a part of it, but we are separate from it at the very same time.
Absolutely. And I think that that also just goes to show that you can really, in the multi layers of people, you can really find something that you like or love about everybody if you just sit down and talk to them.
Yeah. That feels so very important right now in the world that we're living in, because I think one of the things that's really been troubling to me is, like, as I look at how polarized we've become, um, you know, on any number of issues, politics, like, it doesn't even matter at this point. We have a polarized view on much of the world, but I have to believe that on some level, there's a need to have conversations with people where we're asking better questions. We are, asking what's important to you about this issue, as opposed to just saying, well, I know you already think this. Let's get at the underlying sort of message value system that's attached to it. Because to your point, I do think that there are some similarities that we have. There may be some shared values, right? Like, I want a healthy economy too. I want to make sure that I can send my kid off to college. These are things that I might share with someone who has very different belief systems than I do. How we get there may feel very drastically different at times, right? And so I want to understand the value, because I think that then allows us to have a different level conversation, as opposed to just walking in with a particular belief that is set up to say, well, of course, Nichole, you believe this because you represent this group or this identity.
Yes. And, I believe you spoke to that on the podcast episode with Jeremy. So I really enjoyed hearing that perspective when you spoke to that there. So if you're looking for a little bit more of that, go back to the episode with Jeremy May and you will get a whole episode full of it. But all good stuff. So if you could go back and give yourself some advice 5 years ago, what would it be?
I've been thinking about this a little bit lately. And I think, again, it's a reflection of where we are in society, that the only way through is through. I think so many of us are trying right now to find other ways, either around something. I want to go under, I want to go over. And I'm like, you have to walk through. And so some of the conversations that we're having, particularly when it comes to DEI and culture, they're really difficult right now. Again, especially in the space that we're living in. And yet the only way that we get to the light at the other end of the tunnel is to go through. Have these difficult conversations, not to cause discomfort, but in order to really deepen our sense of humanity, right? Our shared humanity, to be able to get to stronger objectives that help us as a community, as a nation, as a global community. And so I think these things are really important, because if we fail to have these conversations, if we fail to have resolution on some of these issues, we're just going to keep repeating the same mistakes over and over again. And it feels very much like today we are caught in that cycle of, I can't believe, something that was addressed 50 years ago, 100 years ago, so forth, is back on the table. And it is because we never fully finished the conversation, if you will. We never
Yes.
came up with solutions that actually were designed to help all of humanity. We focused on, oh, is this group comfortable in this moment? I want to center their particular comfort.
Right. So we put the work in, but we haven't quite gotten there. And then we kind of just let it go a little bit. And now we're set back, unfortunately. But it seems like what you're doing is helping bridge that communication gap. And once again, I think that if people realize we're all the same people on some level, right, we can all connect somewhere. It's just going to make it easier. And such good advice. The only way through is through. You have to remind yourself that, I think, in every single aspect, but especially in business, right? And especially when you have to have difficult conversations where people might feel attacked. And I know that would never be your intention, but we have to get there. And I think that the more conversations we can have about this, hopefully the less attacked people will feel, because that's never the space it's coming from.
Yeah, it is paramount to not having ever flexed a particular muscle, and all of a
Yes.
sudden you want to use it, right? And you're realizing it's not as strong as it should be. I'm feeling some weakness. There's some tension here. Well, of course, because you haven't developed it. And I view conversations on these topics as very much the same. In order for us to get better at something, and this is true for everything in life, in order for us to get better, we must continue to lean into the practice. And so when I talk about curiosity, when I talk about conversation, while I do enjoy a good conversation, I'm not just talking to talk. I'm looking to get to some particular outcome. And even if that outcome is, I just need to understand your perspective on where you're coming from, or maybe there is a shared goal that we have in mind. Like there is some reason that we're sitting down to have this discussion. But what I, definitely advise people against is there seems to be right now a deep pull towards wanting to convince people. And I say, and I've kind of joked with you a little bit about this, like convincing people is not my particular ministry. I'm not interested in swaying you over to my way of thinking per se. I am going to share something that maybe I value, a particular line of thinking that I have. It is up to you whether you choose to accept that, or you're like, that doesn't actually work for me. And I'm okay with that. But in the process of me having this conversation, I'm not worried about just getting my message out. I'm also trying to understand your perspective. Where do you come from? Because even if you are not ready just yet to bridge that gap, I am willing to step in and, depending on the situation, because I think discernment is very important, is I'm willing to bridge that gap where possible.
Yes. So you'll throw the floaty, for example, a little bit further to give somebody some room to get across, which is so helpful. People need that kind of bridge to get across, like you had said.
It's what we do as parents for our kids.
Yes.
Right? Like our kids don't come out knowing how to reason or be logical, or read or write or any of the things, right? Even walk. And our job is to be there for them, to support them as they build and deepen these skill sets. And so, and celebrate one another, quite frankly, when we get it right. Like how many times when a baby takes their first steps are we clapping and cheering and encouraging them? And yet we're unable to do that, it seems, as adults, to encourage other people who have started along this journey, made these first steps, which were scary, right? I didn't know if I was going to fall. I didn't know if I was going to get hurt. And then as they take step 1, step 2, and they're all of a sudden they're like, oh, I can handle this. And before you know it, it's a full out sprint, right? They're running across your house at this point. And I liken it very much in the same way to the conversations. As we build those muscles, as we get stronger, it becomes less taxing, a little less uncomfortable, if you will, because we're ready for it.
Yes. And nobody's expected to know everything at the beginning. And nobody, I think it's just scary in this world where it's very polarizing right now, right? And the attack, everyone feels a little defensive.
Absolutely.
And understandably so. But it's so helpful that you can approach it with that perspective and let everybody know we're starting the same here. We're all learning new things. And I'm really jealous I haven't gotten to be in one of your boards that get to do some work with you. I think it would be incredible. And I've gotten lucky to see some behind the scenes stuff. So a little jealous there, but
Yeah.
they're lucky.
And I appreciate the perspective that we're not born knowing how to do these things, right? And that their expectation shouldn't be there, because that feels really critical to doing this work, is just accepting that people are where they are, right? No judgment on it. It's simply because we all have to have a starting place. And even as I say these words out of my mouth, like, I have to acknowledge that as much as I lean into these practices, there are still plenty of times I get it wrong, and sometimes really wrong. But the idea is, what I am not intimidated by is the idea that we have to pick ourselves up and try again. Right. To me, that's how growth happens. And so if it weren't for the mistakes I've made, how would I know that I've gotten it right?
Yes. Yes. And I can actually remember you saying that you express that you know you've made a mistake, and you like don't just try to brush over it or say, "Oh, well, I didn't know." Like you are so respectful. And I've heard it when you Melissa's episode, another throwback. I think there was something Melissa had said about where she lived and how her culture was referred to. And you were just so respectful of that. And even there, that should be the norm, right? But the way you called yourself out, and you're just, "Oh, thank you so much for letting me know."
Yeah.
And that felt really kind and understanding and good, right? So if more people can get that from you, beautiful.
I appreciate that callback. And I remember the situation because she was talking about what it meant to be Hawaiian and how she did not necessarily identify as Hawaiian because she views those as people that are distinctly from that island originally. So the people that would be native to Hawaii. And for me, I think, and again, I will not say this is something that I've always been able to tap into. This is more about intentionality. I, just like many other people, have had my moments in life where you could correct me and I'm like, nope, don't want to hear that, right? Like, I'm shutting it down mentally, physically, like I'm disengaged from the conversation. But what I realized is I can't lean in and deepen the work that I want to do with the end goal of having the impact that I desire if I am not willing to listen. If I am not willing to be wrong on occasion, to learn from that and do better the next time, I can't make the progress forward that I desire.
Yes. And now you flex that muscle so much. Look how strong you are. And that's just going back to speak to what you were just saying.
I do appreciate that, and I still get it wrong.
Yes.
But here's the thing, and like I say that laughing because it's joyful for me, right? Like, I don't want to hurt anyone in the moment. I don't want to, again, step on toes of people. But if we both come out of the conversation richer because we were willing to listen to one another and grow as a result, then my goal was accomplished. Even if I fumbled the play, so to speak, as we're going through it.
Yes. So is there one moment, or could you share a moment where you realized, this is why I do this work? This is why I'm here. This is what it's about.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of that has been coming up for me in coaching. So for folks who do not know, I do both organizational strategy work and then I do executive coaching. And I hear breakthroughs on both sides, but in particular, when I'm coaching people, it is that light bulb moment where you can literally see the lights go on in someone's eyes and they're like, I hadn't considered it from that perspective before. To me, that feels like the win, right? I want to challenge people to think differently, to consider new ways to sort of reason through different scenarios, and to accept this idea that there isn't going to be one right answer. And so when I think about that, again, I do have my own perspectives on life and things that I would hope for, but I am not really about telling you what to believe, or what to think. I am more of the school of thought that I simply want you to think. So if there is an agenda to be had, that is my agenda. Like, can we spend a little bit more time reflecting? Can we be introspective with ourselves to just say, like, hey, I'm noticing this thing about me. This situation was challenging for me, or this conversation triggered me in some way. What was the dynamic trying to tell me? Right? Like, a lot of times, I think even in our body, if you're having a conversation and you feel your chest tighten up or your hands are clenching, like your body is telling you there is something deeper under the surface. And we notice this. I think all of us notice this, right? And a lot of people, even externally watching you, be like, "Oh, I saw how tense you looked." Where we often do not take that next step, though, is to examine what was present for me when these things were happening, right? So, like, why did I have the knee-jerk reaction? Why did I feel so compelled to say something to them in that moment, or to clap back, or whatever it is that we're doing, right? Or to shut down? What is happening for me? And I think if we can reflect on that, it is an opportunity to say, okay, when someone comes at me this particular way, like I don't like to be told that I'm wrong. Okay. If you're having that reaction in that moment and it's really strong, what about being told you are wrong, whether it is directly said or inferred in the moment, bothers you, right? And where does that come from? Because it always stems from somewhere. But being able to have the time and space to unpack that, I see us being able to do more, I guess, a deepened amount of work because we're able to reflect on a level that isn't just surface anymore.
It's very rippling, right? What you do has such a big rippling effect when you are coaching one-on-one. That just expands out. It extends out because you're teaching people how to communicate better, essentially.
Yeah.
And we all need so much more of that. That's really helpful. And examine themselves, I think, too.
Yeah. And I see it even in organizations. I did a activity recently with a client where we were envisioning a future. And I think this group in particular was at a point in time where, there's so much happening with executive orders and people being sort of wary about what they can and cannot do, that it can feel at times like we're responding from a scarcity mindset. Like there's only so many resources to go around. We have to figure this out. Otherwise, we're not going to exist anymore. And I think this idea of being able to envision a better future kind of pulled scarcity off the table. And it was more, we're going to approach this from an abundance mindset. Like, what could be possible?
Mm.
And what I so appreciated about how the group coalesced around this is that it became a common goal, right? Something that they could share. There are differences in the group, different ways that people think that they might arrive at a solution. There are different lived experiences, cultural identities, etc. But when you put the shared goal in front of them, it was no longer about, I'm just advocating for this one group. I'm advocating for us, right? How do we serve our clients better? How do we make sure that the work that we're doing is really felt in the community in a positive way? And so in the process of doing that, they really began to sort of open up a little bit more to this idea that maybe some of the systems that they were using in the past weren't as effective as they could be. So, like, never let a crisis go to waste. I'm like, at this point, for many nonprofits, I think they're realizing, like, hey, there were things that weren't really working for us all along, but we never took the time to pause long enough to actually make changes. And unfortunately, like, I don't love the conditions that we're dealing with right now, but what is present is an opportunity. So instead of finding yourself 90% federally funded, like, what does it mean to say, hey, we're going to diversify our funding base so that if something, and God forbid, like, this should happen again, but like, if something comes along that challenges our funding, that we are not 90% reliant on a single source.
Right.
Right. And I think that could be said in so many ways. Like, I was kind of joking with another colleague over the weekend about sort of the stock market. And while it is not funny what is happening right now in the market, we were talking about the fact that people own a lot of single stocks. And so you can look at a single stock company and say, like, oh my gosh, I bought, and I'm not even going to name anyone right now, but think of a stock that might have recently really tanked. And, if you owned a single stock in it, it can wipe you out overnight.
Right.
Right. But if you were to buy into a diversified fund, all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, I did take a hit, but I'm not wiped out in its entirety. And so I look at that, whether it is in our personal life or it is in our organizations, where are the spaces we can be much more intentional about not spreading ourselves so thin, but really making sure that we have sort of an approach that is going to allow, again, the diversification that will protect us in some respects, because we haven't put all our eggs in one basket.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, if someone was feeling stuck or disconnected in a conversation, what's one curious question that they could ask to move things forward without shutting someone down? If you have an example.
Yeah, I the thing that I probably go to in that is like, could you tell me more about that? How'd you come to see things this way? When did you first hear about this? Like, generally asking good questions to people. And we want to do it in a way that they're open-ended, that allow people to respond. So it's not just a yes or no, because you're not really going to get any information. And I do ask why periodically, but I am thoughtful about where I ask why questions. It has always been my understanding and definitely my experience that when we ask why someone has done that, that can feel more accusatory. Even if your message, your delivery is meant to be sort of benign, like this is friendly, like, hey, Nichole, why'd you do that over the weekend? Like all of a sudden it's like, oh, are you questioning my judgment, or is something else coming up here? And so, just being able to ask what about something is important, or how they understand things, or can you tell me more? Like, these are go-to questions that I often use.
And it feels, like you said, much less accusatory. Even that example you just used, why did you do that over the weekend? I found myself tensing up, like, why are you questioning me? But in the beginning of that conversation, that question, I was thinking the proverbial why. It's just like you said, not phrased that way. They're phrased more thoughtfully. And I think you were saying you're using callback also. So you're letting them know that you heard them, and now you're asking a question reflective of that.
Yeah, I do think the callback is really important, particularly where you may be disagreeing with someone. And so, like, in that moment, even just being able to listen to someone answer a question, you disagree, you have a different viewpoint, to just be able to pause long enough to say, so it sounds like what you're saying is, right? Like, that little pause and paraphrasing of what they've just shared tells the person, I hear you, right? I'm not validating that I agree with you. I'm simply saying, hey, Nichole, it sounds like what you said was these three things are important to you. Did I get that correct? Because in asking that secondary question, did I get this correct? Or is there anything else that I might have missed? What you're now opening the door to is, like, we hear things through our lens. And even as I try to be an active listener, life happens, right? You have things that are going on in your home life. There might be a colleague who's standing right outside your office door. There are things that are happening, right? And so we may find our attention sort of pulled away from the topic at hand. But if I can paraphrase back to you and give you this opportunity to lean in and say, actually, no, you got that piece a little bit wrong, or that's not exactly what I meant. Now I get to a greater sense of understanding.
Absolutely. So on that, what role does curiosity play in the work you do?
Curiosity is the cornerstone of the work that I do on so many levels. Whether I am talking about DEI engagements or I am talking about executive coaching, I tend to lead with questions. And it's really because, whether it is an organizational sort of framework or strategy that we're examining, tell me a little bit more about what is happening right now, right? What would you like to see look different? How have these things proven important before? How have they served you or perhaps not served you, right? So I'm leaning into this so that we can get a baseline understanding. And yes, I may be the person asking the questions initially, but I'm not just doing it for me. It's particularly as a consultant, it is important for me to have an understanding of what's going on. But I think in conversations when I'm working with teams, the benefit of having those conversations out loud in front of multiple people is that you will start hearing them build upon one another. Someone's going to say, oh, well, we've done it this way for 10 years. And someone else chimes in and they're like, oh, but the reason that we decided to do it this way was because XYZ factor. And someone else is going to be like, oh, but we also tried this other thing. It didn't work. Here are the reasons. And so now we're getting to a more complete version of the truth than we would had I just come in and be like, what do we want to see different, y'all? Right? I have no background information. So I think curiosity really is a cornerstone for me in that way. And then when it comes to executive coaching, curiosity is everything. My singular goal as a coach is to help you get to your goal. Right? So I am supposed to approach these conversations without agenda other than literally helping you get to the goal or breakthrough that you're looking for. And so if I know this, I have to lead with good questions.
Absolutely. Is there One common misconception about the conversations you facilitate, both with nonprofits and on one-on-one coaching, or what's one common misconception that you would say for people that think about coaching, and again, those hot topic words, diversity, equity, inclusion? Is there a common misconception, or would you say there's lots of them?
I'm like, just one. We only have time for one.
Yeah, I don't think there's one.
I think particularly around DEI, I'll start there. I think the misconception is that people fundamentally understand what it is. And I start there because then that allows me to unpack more, right? So if we think about, and I have spoken about this on other podcasts as well, like even the word diversity has become weaponized to mean other. Right? You're not white, you're not male, you're not cisgender, you're not Christian, then therefore you are diverse. Where I take issue with that is that the very word diversity means all of us. So you don't, if we're going to use it in that way, you have redefined, if you will, what that word meant. And so you're choosing to otherize people in the moment rather than respecting the fact that we collectively, through all of our identities, make up diversity. And so I think being able to get at the actual terms is really, really important. I had a colleague not too long ago tell me that they were wrestling with someone in their community who was a philanthropist, and they fundamentally disagreed with equity, right? Like, I don't like this DEI thing. I want to do away with it. And what the person said, and I was so proud of them in this moment because they said, I leaned in with a question. And they said, based on what I know about you, I see your work as quite equitable. Like, you want to make sure everyone has access to education and housing and resources within the community. And here's how I've seen you bring that to life. So tell me a little bit more about where you disagree with the idea of equity. And I was like, oh, well, that was beautifully worded. And then as the person kept talking, they were like, oh, but I do agree with those things. And so they had to pause themselves to be like, wait, am I actually having a problem with equity? Or am I having a problem with how equity has come to be represented in the broader, society that we're living in? And so to me, that was a turnaround moment. That curiosity helped to bring that conversation to life, to much more so deepen like the level of understanding each of them had in that moment. And it wasn't contentious. It was simply a moment where it's like, oh, I hadn't considered it from that perspective before.
That has to be a really rewarding thing to hear. One, as somebody who's coaching or leading those meetings, but two, to even hear more so reported back to you from somebody that you speak to. So that has to
I love when people come back to me and they tell me, like, I used this question and here's the result I got. And I'm not saying that from an ego boosting perspective. It does make me feel warm and fuzzy on the inside when it happens. But the reason I'm interested in hearing back how people have used these questions and how it's advanced the conversations and deepened the work that they're able to do is because what I'm really interested in understanding is like how they play out in real interactions. Like, these are not people that are necessarily trained on this. These are everyday regular folks, right? And so what I want to know is how more of us get to a place where we can lean into these conversations without always having to feel polarized or feel like we're walking away and things are just left contentious and like, I don't see a pathway forward. I think the reality is we need each other in society to basically succeed. And if I need you, I can't isolate you to the point where I'm not willing to talk to you anymore.
Absolutely. And one of my questions was, how do you create space for people to explore all these topics in a way that feels safe and productive? I think you really just told us with curiosity. Is there anything else, though, that you would want to add to that?
Yeah, I think if I'm facilitating a session, like, I name outright, this may be uncomfortable. Like, I have no problem telling people, like, the conversation we're about to embark on is going to cause a level of discomfort for many people in the room, perhaps even me. And yet, it's worthwhile. Right. And so, like, getting people to be able to name what they're hoping for on the other end of this is also incredibly empowering because it's not, sort of just me. Don't take my word for it. Like, listen to these other people. Right. I'm a reading rainbow kid. And so I think that, just giving them an opportunity to say, like, hey, I want better working relationships with my colleagues. I want to make sure that the project that we are addressing moves forward in a timely manner, that it is under budget, it whatever it happens to be, right? I have new teammates that I really need to get to know better. when we look at it from that position, if people were to name the things that they thought were important to them, that they potentially see coming out of this conversation up front, and I say, in order to get there, right, there may be some discomfort that you experience. And is it still worth it for you, right? Like if we're looking at it this way, how badly do you want this outcome? Right? Because we have to be able to stretch ourselves. And so I say those are a couple of the strategies that I might use. And then I also look at safety, not just as something I own as the facilitator. That is something that the room has to decide that they wish to maintain for one another.
Mhm.
I can choose my language carefully. I can choose how I interact with people, but how will you all sit in community with one another?
Not just about Danielle at that point, right? It's about the room.
Yeah.
The room in greater society. Would you say your conversations around culture and leadership have changed over the past 5 years, or even, I mean, I have to imagine, obviously, that they have changed. You've already spoken to that, saying that you've been in this space for, 20 years. You were working first in the nonprofit world. So how have your conversations around culture and leadership changed over the years?
Yeah, I appreciate the how reframing of that because they change every day. And part of that is culture changes every day. I will often say that even within the cultural group that we belong to, if you think back to what was happening 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when you were a child, likely what is being spoken about in your community, the traditions you have, the practices you have, they've shifted over time, right? They've shifted. And so if they are shifting, I must also hold space for the fact that other people's cultures are shifting simultaneously. Right. And sometimes we play off of one another because in my culture, we've done this particular thing. There's a reaction in another culture. It could be positive, it could be negative, it could be sort of just in between. But there's a shift that happens. And so I think, yes, the conversations absolutely do change. When I think about even going back 5 years ago now to like what we were talking about when it came to culture, so much of it was at the beginning of 2020 because we had the pandemic that was going on globally. We saw who had access to vaccines, who did not want to take vaccines, and like there's so much that's going on. We had the murder of George Floyd, which now sparked a racial reckoning in the US. There's so much that's happening. We were deepening a conversation in particular about racial equity at that point in time. Okay.
Absolutely.
But that is not the be all end all when it comes to culture, because again, there are so many identities that we all possess as individuals. Like there's no one person who has just one identity. We have multiple identities. And so what I've seen is, there was a deep lean into, I think, racial equity at that moment in time, people wanting to have that conversation, deep discomfort around it. People, again, on very different sides of the aisle when it came to how we address this. Do we address this? Is it worth having the conversation at all? And I would say that was the discussion of the moment.
Mhm.
Fast forward to where we are today, and I think what we're seeing is somewhat of a backlash against having had those initial conversations because we never finished them. Right? We had them, and some people were like, "We don't want to engage. We don't think this is right. This is not fair. Why are we overly focusing on this?" And I'm not going to say that they're wrong in the sense that we were having a heavy focus on it, because what they were saying, and I do not think that many of us listened effectively at that time, is we also want to talk about some other things.
Mhm.
And that never really made it into the conversation. And so, i.e., now I see the swing very much, in the opposite direction. So again, we're going from one pole to the next pole, right? And I'm thinking that the space that we need to really begin to address is this middle ground, right? Where the pendulum comes back to center.
Yes.
And it might swing a little bit left, it might swing a little bit right, but it is not at the extreme ends. There's a lot of people who can be quite reasonable in the middle because they're like, okay, what is that shared value? We may not see and agree on the way to get to the solution right now, but we can say there is a shared solution we're striving towards. So based on your experience, based on mine and these other folks, how do we get there in a way that respects both of our needs in this moment? And that's the space I do not hear enough of us talking about right now.
Yes. So meeting in the middle, kind of not polarizing, going extreme.
But here's the thing, and I do want to make a distinction here because I have been challenged before where people are like, well, you just want to focus on what makes us similar. And I'm like, actually, I don't. I want to focus on a solution that is going to get us to a place where we can collectively benefit from it. That is the similarity I'm looking for. But the reality is, I need our differences also to be surfaced in this moment because how you see the world versus how I see the world and our respective lived experiences are going to shape ultimately the input that we give to this solution. Right. So if I want world peace, if I want stronger economics, if I want to end, the epidemic of homelessness in this country and unhoused people, that is a solution we might be able to agree on. How we get there may differ, but I also need to hear from your perspective what is important to you, what would be important to other people in your community that I might not have access to because I don't live that reality. Like I can't shame you for not knowing it, but I absolutely can be intentional about me asking the questions in order to learn.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. Is there an or what is an unexpected way that this work has helped people or organizations grow? Is there anything that sticks out in your head that you're like, I had no idea that would happen?
I think that, and again, I don't know if I was expecting it or not expecting it, but what I have found is that the organizations who are willing to sit in this process, they become better stewards of the resources they have. They have better relationships with the clients that they're serving. And I find that they are also much more innovative because when you are open minded to the idea that there is not a single right answer, it allows you to say, hey, you know what, we surveyed people, we talked to our clients, we talked to our team, we talked to the board. Here are 10 possible pathways that we could go, right? And so because they're open to this idea that there are multiple ways that we can walk this path, then they have a list of things that they can tap into. And it is not just about, again, selecting one that feels like it's the only way. It's like what works best for the context of what we're dealing with right now. And
Right.
so as I look at that, I'm like, of course that deepens the relationships because you didn't dismiss what someone told you, right? Of course it makes you more innovative because now instead of one idea, I have 10, I have 15, right?
And you're
And
willing to share them also. It must make it's a better environment. It can help the company grow. You never know when that $1 million idea, I'm doing the
and
air quotes here, but you never
yeah,
know when it's going to come or who it's going to come from.
yeah. I think about that sometimes, like how many brilliant ideas and breakthroughs have we silenced because we've silenced certain voices,
Yes,
you know?
absolutely. And you just saying that made me think of it. I can only imagine.
Yeah. I mean, and so for whatever reason, like, oh, women are not smart enough to be in the STEM fields. Therefore, we should rely on men's knowledge, like of advanced, technology and thinking. And that was the way it was for many, many years, right? And so if
Yes.
I'm not listening to women who make up half of our population, I'm like, what are we losing? Or if I
Right.
do that to communities of color, or if I do it even to children, like I came from a youth serving, background, and I saw people do it all the time. Oh, they're just kids. And I'm like, they're kids who have thinking minds and they have ideas and they're innovative and they see the world differently than we see it. So perhaps they don't have the full experience that we might as older adults at this point, but they certainly have perspectives, and those perspectives warrant listening to.
Absolutely. And they still have lived experiences. And I know that you have spoken to that before, but it's important to hear those especially when
Absolutely.
they're different than our own, right?
Yeah.
How
And
else are we going to learn?
ultimately they will be different. Like we're talking generational differences, which is also cultural. And so if
Yes.
you are 10 years, 20 years, 30 years behind me, you will see the world differently than I do.
Absolutely. My goodness, can we the difference in generations. I know we both have similar aged kiddos, but we really see it as parents, I think.
Absolutely.
Oh my. What's something new that you're excited to explore or to expand on looking ahead now? We've done
Yeah.
5 years. What does the next 5, 10, 15 years hold?
That's a great question. I'm like, I don't fully know the answer to that one. But I say that because I am open to opportunities that present themselves as the world continues to unfold around us. The thing is, like, I can certainly say I would like to do XYZ. And yet in 6 months from now, that may not be what's needed. And so I think being able to be flexible enough to pivot as warranted, and sometimes within a year, pivot multiple times. So as I think about like what I am personally excited about right now, like I'm definitely deepening my work into executive coaching. I absolutely love being able to work one-on-one and with teams where we're coaching towards a particular goal. The breakthroughs that happen for individuals are tremendous. And I very much, I think, resonate with this idea of agency and people feeling like they have the power to control things within their sphere of influence. And I want to be able to put that power back in people's hands. And it's not even me putting it back in their hands. It's them understanding, perhaps in some cases for the first time, like, oh, I can shift this reality. And I think there's so much just power there, period, when we realize for ourselves, I don't have to wait for an outside entity to change this for me, but I can affect change.
Definitely. And you're starting the work. It's nice when people will continue on the path doing it themselves.
Absolutely. So that feels like a big piece for me. So I'll be taking on some new clients moving into the second half of the year who want to focus on coaching. And so one of the things that I'll offer is I have a 12-week coaching package where we can, again, tackle whatever goals people have in mind. A lot of them are going to be focused on leadership, but also it is going to be about really building healthy team cultures, particularly in the environment that we're living in. A lot of my clients, what I would say is they're brilliant people, right? They have sharp minds, they are good at their jobs, and sometimes it's just having set aside time to walk through your goals and be intentional and create action steps that you can then live out in your day-to-day work. That's what I'm focusing on. And I want people to be able to do it in a way that's authentic to them, right? So bringing in your identity, if you're introverted, honoring that versus trying to force you to be extroverted, like come as you are, because that feels like the best place to start from. Like we're not going to mold you into something that you aren't. We want to bring out the best in who you already are.
That's such a refreshing take on things. What's one thing that you wish more people understood about building inclusive workplaces and communities? Is there one thing? I know, you know what? I'm narrowing all these questions down. Don't let me limit you if you have more than one thing, but what would one thing be if you could say to the world that you wish more people understood about building inclusive?
Again, I'm going to go back to this idea of curiosity, right? Before you decide you want to build an inclusive environment for your team, have you asked them what inclusion means? We operate so much on this, if you build it, they will come mentality. And I'm like, it's not going to work the way you think it will. Some people might come and other people are like, oh, this was not built for me. This is it's not meeting my need in this moment. And so I think by opening the door up to asking people, what is important to you? What makes you feel valued? What makes you feel included? Are there moments when you don't feel included? Or even if we're thinking back to past jobs or friendships or family, has something happened where you exclusively, like you felt excluded from the conversation or the working dynamic? Because those are things that I think help us to then build a better reality. And I'm not saying that everybody and every comment that is made is going to get worked into this plan, because if we have 50, 100 people plus in an organization, that's 100 different perspectives that you might have to take in. But where are the common threads? Where are the common threads? So that's one thing that I would say. And then I think it's also about proactively building in inclusion for the people who are not even at your organization yet. And so as I say that, like we can sit down right now and like within our team, we can say, what does inclusion mean for all of you? What is important? What would you like to see? What would you not like to see? And then I have to also hold space for the fact that there's turnover in organizations. So there will be new people coming in. How often do we review the agreements that we have set up? Have we brought people into conversation to ask them what inclusion means as they're getting settled in? Right? Is there a way to have this be a continuous process? And I'm not saying it has to be every single time that someone walks in the door, because I know there's a lot of pushback that we get. But like, are there regular points in time? If you do a staff retreat every year, is that something that is built in? Is it built in as part of the onboarding? So even if it is the manager to the employee in this case, hey, I want to make sure that you really feel welcome and that you belong, you feel like you belong on this team. What might that look like for you?
Right. Because it's different for everybody.
Right. And exactly, it's going to be different for everyone. And we have the ability to pull those levers if only we slow down long enough to be intentional about it.
And ask the questions, right? Be curious.
Absolutely.
That's our favorite word today, but I mean, really, it's the best one to be talking about. It gets to the root of a lot of problems, I think, is what I'm hearing.
It certainly does. I mean, we still need action-oriented people. So folks, do not think that I'm just sitting here in philosophical land. I do want answers to some questions with the goal of putting them to use.
Yes, absolutely. So, what advice would you give to someone who wants to foster more connection and understanding, but doesn't know where to start?
Yeah. I've asked this of almost all my guests that have come on this show so far, and it's been really interesting to hear people's responses.
And
Um,
now I've stolen your question.
you have stolen my question today. That's okay. We've repurposed it. And I think it is for me where I would start with this, because again, there is no one right answer. So I would say go back and listen to all the guests and how they've framed it, and maybe one will resonate more so with you. But for me, I want to know what it is that I actually want to understand better. That's my starting place. Do I want to understand how communication functions? Do I want to understand how a particular community or culture moves around decision making? What is it that do I want to understand how, we talk all the time when people are ready for promotions. You have to be able to work with a diverse audience of people or clients, etc. What does that mean to the company? How might I demonstrate it, right? So if the more I can get specific on my desires around like this learning, the easier it becomes for me, because now instead of drinking from the fire hose, I'm isolating down to like maybe one or two issues that I want to focus on today. Tomorrow's another day. 6 months from now, you can, reshuffle and say, hey, I learned this particular lesson. I'm ready to move on. But what is important today?
Very good. And I'm gonna throw one more question out there for you, Danielle. I know we've been chatting for a while, but if you could design the ideal future where people engage across differences with more curiosity and respect, what would that look like?
In your question, if I could design this, it wouldn't be contingent upon my answer alone.
It would
I'm
be
very serious.
inclusive of
It
everyone's,
would be
right?
inclusive of what we need. And so I think my ideal world, in some respect, I want to honor the individual choices, values, norms that we hold. And I want to also ask others what's important to you, because I think this global we is what is missing in a lot of instances. It seems that we are so focused on what I care about and what I need that we have forgotten what we need.
Collectively.
Yeah, it's the collective.
Well, that feels really good to me because one thing that you have taught me actually is to get data from people and then to use that data, not to just have it for the sake of having it, but to really respect that people gave you their opinions and try to honor that in some way. And that has always felt really good to me and really comforting to me, right? As somebody who leads these kinds of conversations. You're not just doing it for giggles. You're not just doing it for any reason other than to learn and to figure out the why behind things, the curiosity that is in you. Thank you so much for sharing all of this with me, Danielle.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for sitting down and asking these questions, because it really does feel like the tables have turned. And so this was my pleasure to be able to just reflect back on the last 5 years and what's to come. And I will say that just in a closing thought, like despite all that is going on in the world, I remain hopeful that things will right themselves eventually, because we do have agency. I think this is a moment for us to think about what values we hold and how we are choosing to show up or not show up in the moment. And like, just be really honest with ourselves about that. Not every pathway is for everyone, but where can you make a difference in the world that is going to bring us to a healthier society?
Absolutely. And what feels genuine and honest and real to you, too, right? And what you believe in.
Absolutely. Thanks so
Thank you
much,
so
Nichole.
much. Thank you, Danielle. I hope you have a great day.
You do the same. As I close out this special anniversary episode of Unpacked Culture Chronicles, I find myself sitting in deep gratitude. 5 years ago, I stepped into this work because I saw the disconnect between the stories being told about communities and the lived realities within them. I wanted to help shift the narrative, not by speaking for people, but by disrupting systems and encouraging leaders and teams to listen more deeply, reflect more intentionally, and lead with equity at the center. This past year, more than ever, I've been reminded that the path forward isn't about convincing people. It's about creating space for people to think more deeply, ask better questions, and stretch into discomfort when the moment calls for it. It's about curiosity, not certainty, humanity, and not hierarchy, and community, not silos. I've watched coaching clients have light bulb moments that ripple far beyond our sessions. I've seen organizations take risks to imagine better futures and to shift from scarcity to abundance. And I've been humbled by the vulnerability, honesty, and hope that so many people have brought to this work, even when it gets hard. So to every client who invited me into your journey, every team that allowed me to hold space during difficult conversations, and every individual who trusted me enough to explore uncomfortable truths together, I have to say thank you. Your courage is what keeps me going. To the colleagues, mentors, friends, and collaborators who supported me in this year, especially behind the scenes, you're the reason the work is sustainable. Your encouragement, your feedback, your presence, they've all helped me to stay grounded, clear, and bold. We're living in a time of deep division, but I still believe, and I have to believe, that healing is possible. That meaningful connection across difference is still within reach. And that curiosity can be a bridge if we're willing to walk it. Here's to the next 5 years, to deepened practice, to shared growth, and to all the possibilities that unfold when we ask what else might be true. Until next time, be well.